I was on one of my internet binges when I came across this wonderfully interesting article. Where did all the starships go by Jonathan Moot? And apart from the introduction where Jonathan introduces himself and says that he works for Data Wrapper, by the way, Data Wrapper is a pretty cool product for creating charts, maps, and tables. And they are really visually pleasing, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is that uh, Jonathan says, as a reader of science fiction, I've noticed that the sci-fi aisles in bookstores are getting smaller and smaller, so small in fact that now I have to regularly make a trip to a shop here in Berlin. Adeland. Science fiction and fantasy Buchhandlung. Bla bla bla. Das Adeland ist nicht nur eine Buchhandlung, sondern auch die Verwicklung eines Traums, denn wir lieben Bücher. Wir haben bla 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 eine Schwache für fantastische Literatur und Spielarten. Wir sparen, was ist Google Translate. The thing with any other search engine that isn't Google is that it's just doesn't scratch the same itch, unfortunately. So even though I'm using Brave, I always need to go back to Google for Google Maps or Google Translate or other services.
Schwärmen.
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 All right, I haven't heard this. Wir schwärmen leidenschaftlich von der Autorinnen, die wir schätzen. Wir möchten unsere Leidenschaft. I used to know German a lot better, but I don't know. If you don't use it, you passion, Leidenschaft.
Leidenschaft.
Leidenschaft. An unsere Kundinnen weitergeben. All right. So small in fact that now I regularly have to make the trip to a shop here in Berlin. Fantasy seems to be taking over. I don't like fantasy as much as I like sci-fi. I feel like, in my opinion, at least, the area and the pool for creation of fantasy is a lot more narrower than one of sci-fi. And more or less, if you are a fantasy lover, if you go through all the classics in every medium, if you read The Lord of the Rings, or if you watch the movies, or if you play the Witcher games, or the Elder Scrolls games, or whatever, I think after sometimes you're gonna realize that a lot of, or Game of Thrones, a lot of these concepts will be replicated and copied from one another, and you can show more boobies or whatever, but there is no room for real imaginative innovation compared to sci-fi, at least. Fantasy seems to be taking over, at least commercially, and while this trend is no secret, I thought it would be interesting to visualize it. Why is this trend no secret? Nobody wants to buy the future. Why science fiction literature is vanishing? Only 12% of the reading public were interested in reading science fiction. And this is so sad. Science fiction was probably my favorite genre of like both books and movies when I was a kid. I would read the journals of the people who went to the moon and the predictions on when could we visit Mars, or whether aliens exist, or the speculative descriptions of goddamn of planets in our solar system. So sad that love for science fiction is vanishing. Oh, okay, I'm gonna leave this here. All right. On the search for a suitable dataset, I came across the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, a volunteer effort to maintain an up-to-date source of bibliographical information on works of fiction that fell into the genres of science fiction, fantasy, or horror. A volunteer effort to maintain an up-to-date source of bibliographical information. All right. Let's see how often the typical sci-fi words have been mentioned in the 200,000 titles in your database over the decades. So, first of all, these weekly blog posts are mostly posted in order to promote the charts, which are, again, pretty cool. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. But the information presented behind it, it's really interesting. It's not shilling for the sake of shilling. It's basically a pretty interesting article with the addition of their own product being sprinkled in it. The space age is over, literally. Share of English language sci-fi, fantasy, and horror novels with selected science fiction terms in their title. Space. You must be kidding me, man. So this is the title. So space. 3% of books in 1950 had space in their title compared to 0.2. Damn, this is sad. Planets 2.2 compared to 0.2. Martians. Now, I never understood why. I understand why Mars is important in terms of space colonization, but in terms of alien life and extraterrestrial things, we knew that there was no life on Mars like 50, 60 years ago. So everything that has Martians in their name, I was like, I don't know if I should watch it. If you're gonna make science fiction, let's make it more interesting, more hard. Moons, alright, and Earth. So, the data tells a clear story. Classic sci-fi keywords peaked in the 50s and 60s and have steadily declined since. Space saw the sharpest drop from 2.5% of the titles to 0.2% of the titles. Mars, planets, and moons follow the same trajectory. The golden age of space exploration in fiction seems to have ended alongside the Apollo program. Alright, now how this compares to some magical keywords. Magical goes from 0.4 in 1950 to 1.8 in 2020. Dragons, well, dragons were steadily growing. Witches, wolves, and vampires. I mean, how connected is the term of vampire to fantasy? Maybe it is. Yeah, it is. Meanwhile, fantasy keywords show an opposite trend. The dragons barely registered before 1980, but now appear in nearly 2% of the titles. Magical and witches follow a similar trend. Twilight and Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, revived the vampire genre. Alright, but there are some topics that never fade away. Like time. Going from 1.5% to 0.7%, which there is actually a downward spiral, but still it's keeping its trajectory on a much slower pace compared to whatever happened in the science fiction section. Stars, stars also dropped a bit. Darkness increased a bit. Death, looms, and wars are also here. So, not everything follows the genre shift. Words like darkness, wars, and death retain a remarkably stable presence in book titles across 7 decades. These are genre agnostic terms, equally at home in space opera or epic fantasy, with a slight uptick around the 90s, supposedly due to the decade's fascination with the supernatural. Time travel hasn't been materialized, time itself continues to be a topic. Shelves are changing. So, what does this mean? Alright, so the space operas are, well, losing in popularity and are being replaced with urban fantasy and dragon laden epics. But as I said, sci fi themes are extremely, extremely diverse. The fact that you can create a horror movie in which the crew of a ship needs to save a stranded ship next to, was it Saturn or Jupiter? And they come there and they realize there is no one in that ship and there is something wrong happening there, and a lot of weird energy. Of course, I'm talking about the movie The Event Horizon. It's basically a horror movie, a hard horror movie with a sci-fi backdrop. I don't think that you could make it as scary or as interesting if it was a science fiction. If it was in a science fiction setting. It might even be evolving into something new. Post science fiction. Alright, I also want to see what's here. Still, I miss those aisles. There's something beautiful about a paperback with a title and cover promising distant stars, strange new worlds, and most importantly, lots of starships. I mean, these are the most cliched science fiction movies. I think you can find more interesting stories that use science fiction as a backdrop. For example, Cowboy Bebop. Imagine having the beautiful tonality of the jazz music while you are driving these small ships and you have these revolvers and you have Spike who is a larger than life depressed entity, and Faye and the big guy, I don't know what his name is, and all the crew, and this melancholy that goes through everything in Cowboy Bebop. It's fantastic, and it's set in a sci-fi world. It's set in a sci-fi environment. What I learned along the way. Alright, I don't care about this. I want to see. Okay. You don't like my opinions. This is my brain, this is your brain. Smooth, no wrinkles, cute, and yours is bumpy and weird. It looks like a walnut. I don't know, but there's something so cute. There's something so immersive, almost visceral about this. Classic Lensman series, 3 planetary first glance. Well, look at this. Look at this. It almost hits an internal biological sense of exploration in my body. All right, 12%. So we are coming back to this article right here. Nobody wants to buy the future while science fiction literature is vanishing. Only 12% of the reading public were interested in reading science fiction. The science fiction books that do sell are shrinkingly small number of reprints, classics, and novels that have been adapted into movies. So there are only 2 original books. Pestilence by Laura Thalassa and Starter Villain by John Scalzi. The best-selling science fiction novel in that period, Project Hail Mary. Now this is a great book. Andy Weir has this almost incredibly natural way of writing in which there's a lot of hard science in it, which should be boring, but it's written incredibly well and it's woven into the plot that it's almost not noticeable. I agree that his characters are a bit they suffer from this Marvel syndrome in which they need to have quips and funny one-liners. But apart from that, a fantastic book. Sold almost 70,000 copies. This puts it 4 below the bottom of the 10 top 10 overall fiction bestsellers, where Sarah J. Maas' romancy novel A Court of Mist and Fury sits at 19,000 copies sold. There's no way that this book sold only 70,000 copies. In 2021, this happened in 2023. How many books did it sell? All right, I love the goose, so I think he's gonna do a great work. All right. Science fiction is not selling. This marks a significant change from the 1980s, a decade in which science fiction novels like Carl Sagan's Contact, which is also a great movie, and James Caan novelization of The Return of the Jedi appeared among the bestsellers of any given year. Many of these were adaptations of blockbuster films or were connected to movie projects, but not all, as Contact did quite well on its own merits. So what do we have here? The Covenant, Rage of Angels, Princess Daisy, Firestarter. Do I know any of these books? Cujo. Alright, Stephen King. E.T. Alright. The Space Odyssey sequel, the man from St. Petersburg, Ken Follett. I read this, or something else from Ken Follett. Return of the Jedi. Poland. Why all of these look the same? Why is no one making really cool book covers anymore? Or in the 1980s? Okay. So, and what's the cause for it? The genre skews towards adults aged 13 to 45, above average wealth and education, and that readers tend to be heavy readers who engage regularly with other science fiction media, which, again, I think it makes sense. I think the entrance level for fantasy is a lot lower than it is for science fiction. I believe, at least I believe that. But it's hardly like there's less genre media. Cinemas are full of genre blockbusters as they are, and blah 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 blah. Toward the Dark World is not even science fiction. It's a shitty movie. Yeah, and I also mentioned it. There's a marked difference between E.T. the Extraterrestrial on one hand and exhausted IP slop like schlock like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania on the other. Because sci-fi blockbusters of the 80s were produced of human imagination as opposed to C-suit thinking. And it says partially the decline of science fiction could be attributed to that because people have reduced interest in tie-in fiction. Alright, so there's also Dune. So what is the alternative science fiction? Written science fiction is dying. Less books are being written. Less books are making their way to the shelves in the science fiction section. Because science fiction went mainstream. Stories featuring time travel, cloning AI, and apocalyptic plagues find themselves between respectable covers and sold to literally purists, book club members, and others who would never in a million years consider themselves sci-fi fans. Alright, so science fiction stories are getting more rare, and fantasy goes from strength to strength, spinning off new subgenres like romancy and finding new readers. Alright, so this is a history of science fiction. A huge amount of genre science fiction relies on pulpy adventure plots, on absurdly high stakes, on action scenes that end with identifiable villains getting their just desserts. I mean, you could say the same thing for fantasy as well. Most science fiction written for an audience that move on from these plots in grade school isn't beholden to those structures. It features refugees as heroic rebels, senior citizens as youngster coming of age, and to focus on the struggles of a family as a race to defuse a bomb. I should read some. I should read some nuevo. So yeah, hope you like this video. Hope it has been interesting, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.